we cannot talk about OpenStack without talking about also the hyperscale cloud provider and behemoth like AWS or Azure is there, and then GCP is there. So when these big players are there in the cloud native space, how does a company like Anynine differentiate itself from these big players? Because sometimes what we do see is that while these hyperscale cloud providers, they do have everything that you can get from them, but you don't almost need everything. And that the problem that you're trying to solve may be totally different than, one size fits all. So talk about how do you differentiate yourself?
Well, first of all, what's necessary to understand is that a lot of these large corporates on their path of digital transformation do not naturally approach large vendors such as AWS or Azure. They first try to solve these problems and these challenges themselves, digitally transform their own data centers. A lot of these companies, they do have their own data centers or established vendor relationships. So there is a certain resistance to change, and they are not freely running into the open arms of the large vendors. Now, the question is then, why didn't that succeed at scale? And OpenStack is a part of that journey. So there was a lot of hope that there will be a technology offering a similar abstraction like AWS did for virtual machines. And virtualization has been a trend for over a decade, and in a consequence, somebody put basically an API on top of virtualization and offer that as a service. That's basically how AWS was born, and EC2. Now, every corporate who wants to increase the productivity and decrease friction in operations will have to go through a transformation, let's say applying a DevOps kind of model, or today look into containerization. The idea is always the same: is you have a workload that you want to operate, and you want to reduce the effort that's necessary to bring such software into operation, and also the efforts required to maintain it. And these on-premise scenarios often have been very complicated and problematic because there's either a commercial vendor that will ask a lot of license costs for software that will work, or you have to rely on an open source software such as OpenStack, which for many organizations were just too overwhelming. Many organizations did not really manage to get an OpenStack up and running in a way that it could be competitive in pricing. And that, let's say, disappointment of the initial expectations to OpenStack also opened the path for Kubernetes. So these corporate clients on the path having this experience, they have now two choices. Either they try a different technology, for example, Kubernetes, or they will then go to those large infrastructure providers because it seems to be the only thing that really works. And I think that's where Kubernetes gets a lot of momentum from, because you can't just go to the infrastructure provider like AWS and Azure and be happy as a large corporate. Why is that the case? Well, let's say you want to roll out a global product, and you then have to run a software workload across the globe. Your Chinese customers maybe have a stronger affinity and even legal requirements to run on top of Ali Cloud, a local infrastructure provider, rather than AWS or Azure. And in Europe or America, there will be a different provider with more affinity. So the problem of infrastructure agnosticism rises, which is, let's say, not very much wanted by the infrastructure providers themselves, which come with their own APIs and data services and so on. So you have a lot of heterogeneity across these infrastructures. And now Kubernetes seems to become an abstraction layer that allows you to describe a workload, and assuming wherever you go to, there will be a Kubernetes, so that there's some harmonization going on. This connects a bit to the idea that was underlying the technology called Bosch, known from the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. And companies like Anynines, to answer your question, we are actually focused on making that abstraction as smooth as possible. So we have a strong focus on infrastructure agnosticism, where customers have those global platforms which need to run on AWS, on Ali Cloud, and Azure. So what we are doing as a company, we are looking for the most modern, contemporary, progressive open source toolings and build a platform that we call Anynines platform that is fully equipped to run workloads at the scale of thousands or 10,000s of containers running on top of thousands of virtual machines. So the differentiation from the large vendors is not only the price, where we are, as a smaller company, also competitive, but it's also, we are not a product vendor in a classic sense, but we are shipping a software solution, and we're also offering the services, for example, the consulting that's necessary to bootstrap such an environment, and also operations to keep it going. And because often these companies on the digital transformation, they do not necessarily have a team ready to take on such a complicated technology and operate it at a scale of thousands of virtual machines. That requires experience that we bring along with automation tooling in order to make that possible.